Hi there, guys. How's everybody doing today on Monday? Just getting the computer turned on. Hope everybody's having a good day today. How many of you are getting some of that amazing snow? Holy cow, I saw some pictures today and it is crazy. Hey, Becky. My computer's taking forever to load today. It's feeling very Monday-ish. So I'm gonna let everybody jump on. I'm a little late because I realized I did something silly to my phone. Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Kimberly. I put a little, like, one of those ring things on the back so you can hold it, like, in your hand a little bit better. Well, yeah, but when you do that, then you can't put it in your Archon mount because it doesn't fit in your Archon mount. So then I had to figure out how to just take out the case, but it's kind of flustered there for a second. So finally got that done. Hi, Barbie. Hi, Chris. Everybody. So just let everybody kind of jump on real quick, and then I'll just do a quick introduction. We have a very fun kind of Monday live today. I think this will be a great reminder for some of us, a great review for some of us, and then also for us newbies, just a nice little helpful session here in Houston, right, Becky? Isn't it always warm in Houston? I'm pretty sure it is. At least every time I've been to Houston, which is like maybe 4 times, maybe 5, it was always hot and humid, like gross hot and humid. Hey, Christy. All right, so for those of you that don't know, I'm Cameo. I own CR Confections. And I am a cookier here in the Kansas City area. I love to use Glaze icing, which is different. So I feel like there's quite a few new faces around the page lately, and lots of times we've been sharing, which I love it when you share our lives or my page or anything like that. Obviously, it's a way to kind of get that Glaze love out there. So super excited, just to kind of take a day today to really talk about Glaze and just have a place to go and reference when you need to, and have a place to kind of, have that information all in one place. Because sometimes we have those questions that happen, like all over the place, or this is detailed glaze, and what did you do, use here. So it'll be nice to have one live that I can go back to that and can reference to that will have basically all the information. So today we're going to talk about glaze. What is it? What are its goods and bads? We're also going to talk about detailed glaze. Why would I use it? What are its goods and bads? We're going to talk a little bit about consistency, and I'm going to kind of do some things to help you with that. Really, honestly, the biggest thing, if you can just watch as many tutorials as you want, as you can, it will help you. The more practice you get, the better. And we'll kind of talk about that as we go through. So, cold. Maxine's warm in Florida. Lucky. Donna's cold in Georgia. It was cold here, but we saw the sun. Like, I'm looking at the sun right now, and it looks amazing. So, I'm all for the sun. I'm all for cold, but I'm all for the sun. So, very cute St. Patrick's Day. Yes, the St. Patrick's Day cookies are up there. Those are our club cookies for this month. I'm super excited. I also finished my Magoo U homework. If you are a Magoober, I finished it with an hour left in January. So I finished it. I got it done. Right, Becky, I literally always have Lucky Charms, especially Lucky Charms marshmallows, which I know I shouldn't be eating, but I love them. Well, there we go, Kyle. That's what we were waiting for. It was like snowy Pennsylvania. I've seen some of the pictures from up north. Holy cow. Too much like powdered sugar. Well, Kimberly, I'm so glad that you asked that, because that is something that we're going to talk about. So before I flip the camera around and before we actually take a look at the glaze icing in our containers, I'm going to show you how, how I check for consistency, all of that. But Kimberly brought up a great question that I feel like I see a lot in some of the other glaze groups, and just questions that I feel like I've had multiple times. So one of my biggest tips would be Kimberly asked, I've been using Glaze for years, but lately I've been feeling like it tastes like powdered sugar. So yes, this is very common, very true. I feel the same way. I feel like I've combated that with doing this thing. So when I make my icing, I will let it sit on the counter for multiple reasons. You guys probably have heard me say before, I let it sit on the counter so that it gets rid of all the bubbles. You want to get rid of as many bubbles as you can because then you don't have to pop them on your cookie. So getting rid of the bubbles, for sure, that's why it sits on the counter. But really the biggest reason I have my icing set on the counter for at least 24 hours is to get rid of that powdered sugar taste. When you make your glazed icing and you get it all mixed together, it's going to taste like powdered sugar. You guys have always, if you've ever worked with anything with powdered sugar, with any sort of icing, it is always going to overpower every flavor that you have. That's just how powdered sugar is. So the more you can let it sit and relax and calm down and kind of get incorporated with the water and the corn syrup, and maybe you added, maybe added a little bit of vanilla, the more you can let that sit and just chill, relax, then the better you're going to be able to do like an accurate flavor profile. So once you have it set on the counter and you let it set for at least 24 hours, if not longer, then you can then season. I was going to say season because I was just cooking dinner. You can then flavor your icing. And you're going to get a more accurate flavor profile because that powdered sugar has calmed down. So I hope that helps with the powdered sugar, since I have definitely relied on this from probably a couple years ago till now. I make my icing usually on the weekends, and I usually don't really start to flood cookies until Tuesday on a weekly basis. So it has a good 2 days to just kind of sit and hang out on the counter and really kind of chill out with that flavor, with that like powdered sugar flavor, okay? Another thing you can do is, instead of just using vanilla, use some alternative icing flavoring. Like almond is a good one, and you can always get almond that's made, a lot of the times almond extract, you have to be careful. Obviously, if you have a nut allergy, then be careful with this. But a lot of almond extracts actually are made from apricots, the seeds of apricots. So it doesn't really have any sort of nut in it, but always obviously be careful with that. I'm not saying go out and eat almond extract if you have a nut allergy. I'm just saying for the most part, these extracts that have almond in them don't actually have real almonds. They just are the extract from the apricot seed. So using some other type of flavoring, whether that's almond extract, which has a nice flavor, but it's not overpowering. It just kind of has that nice subtle, ooh, what was that flavor? That kind of flavor. Lemon also has that as well. So adding lemon to anything, just a little bit. You don't need a lot. You're not going for a lemon flavor. You're just going for something to kind of work with the vanilla to give it that pretty flavor. Other than that, I don't know what other word to use. It's just a pretty flavor, okay? There's lots of options out there on the market. Lots of people use cookie nip with glazed icing because cookie nip seems to work really well with glazed icing. So that's another one. If you've never tried cookie nip, it's really delicious. It smells like butterscotch, but it's not really. It's like a caramely, it's just really delicious. Hi, everybody. Everybody's ready to go. So I hope that helps with the glazed icing. Yes, Betty, you can basically use anything when it comes to flavoring glazed icing. Extracts, emulsions, oils. There is nothing that you can't use in glazed icing. It will not separate, it will not hurt it, it will not, damage the makeup of it. So you can literally use anything. I've even used like strawberries or raspberries when we get those fresh in the summer. I will, get out all the seeds and have like a simple syrup and just add that to there. Hi, Mom. You're welcome. So I hope that helps you kind of learn how to flavor your icing, because I do know that sometimes it's a little challenging with glaze because it is so sometimes overpowering with the powdered sugar. So definitely let it sit out for a good 24 hours. It would be best. If you can only let it set out for a couple hours, at least let it set out for that long. You know, you want a good 24 hours, but if you don't have 24 hours, I understand. But definitely try that, and then also maybe try just adding a variety of extracts and emulsions to kind of get that flavor profile that you're wanting. And again, almond and lemon are kind of those two that are pretty interchangeable, and they always add something to most other flavors. So for the glaze icing, you guys have already heard me say I just really let my glaze set for 24 hours, and then it's ready to go. At that point in time, after I make it, and 24 hours later, I will then tint it, I will flavor it, I will bag it. So I definitely, the 24 hours letting it set is a good thing to just do for overall, and then it's like kind of, then you can get to work on it and get it all started. You should, Jody. And Michelle also, yes, you can also add some salt to it. I don't think I've ever tried that, so I won't necessarily say, hi Mary, I won't necessarily say I've never done that, but lots of people have also said that. So you can add just a little bit of salt. I have also heard that the salt cuts the sweetness of it. The lemon also cuts the sweetness. If you don't use lemon extract and you actually use real lemon juice, like from a real lemon, you can add just a little bit of that to your icing, and it definitely takes some of that sweetness, because powdered sugar, corn syrup, and water, guess what? It's super duper sweet. But that lemon juice will actually kind of cut some of that, and salt does the same thing. Just be really careful with the salt, because the salt you can go real quick to too bad. So, hi Carrie. So once I get my glaze ready, it's set out for 24 hours. Obviously that's covered. Usually I kind of do double, like I'll do some press and seal, and then I'll do a lid on top of that for covered, and then it just sets out on the counter, because you don't need to put it in the fridge. There's nothing in it. So just let it hang out there on the counter for 24 hours. And then once that time has happened and you're ready, then we can go ahead and flavor it and tint it. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to turn the camera around, and we're going to get started on consistency and talking about the benefits to glaze and the downfalls to glaze. Because just like royal icing, there's great things about royal icing. There's reasons to use it. There's times and places to use it. There's also times and places to use glaze. And I'm going to talk about kind of how we get around those things if you want to stick with glaze and not have to use any meringue powder. Because I know that that's a big benefit to being able to use glaze, is not having that allergen in the icing. I guess it's not really allergen. I mean, I'm not even going to get into that today. Okay, so like I've said before, if you feel like you're nauseous or you get seasick pretty quickly, car sick, you might want to turn away, because I'm not the quickest at moving my camera. I try to get better, but y'all don't want to see it my nose either. Okay, I'm getting a little bit better. Just a little bit. Okay. So excited to see all these beautiful faces on my phone. I love it. And see, now that I can put my phone in here like this, it doesn't matter that I have the new little ring thingy on it, because it still fits in here. Perfect. Okay. Y'all would be so proud of me. I make notes and everything. I mean, I'm high tech today. Not really. High tech with paper and pencils, not really high tech, I guess. Whatever. In regards to recipes, if you would like the icing recipe that I use, it is on my website, crconfections.com, and it's just under the recipe section. So I will drop that link in there right there. And you can just go to the recipe section, and I have my sugar cookie recipe, as well as my glazed icing recipe, as well as my detail glaze, which I'm also going to talk about today. And I'm going to take a drink, so I don't. Last week I talked so much last week. It was such a long one. Okay, so I have 3 different icings here, all just glazed. All right. And these have obviously set out for 24 hours, and then I tinted them. And I wanted to do this because I want you to see what the different consistencies look like. I have one that's too thick, I have one that's too thin, and I have one that's just right, hopefully. This can change. I always tint my icing first, and then I flavor it, and then I check for consistency. Really the biggest thing is to tint it first, because I don't know about you guys, but I definitely have moments where I feel like certain colors make my icing do different things. I feel like red really thins out my icing very quickly. I don't know why. But there are definitely certain colors that I feel like change the consistency of it pretty quickly. So I always tint it first, and then I will build my consistency from there, whether that's maybe I need some water or maybe I need some powdered sugar. So if it is too thin, like this one I said it will be, you can always add powdered sugar to it to thicken it up, okay? If it's too thick, you would add water. I suggest using just a spray bottle. That's what I use, okay? So, and I will say one of the things that I've heard a lot of people, even lately, and when I first posted it as well, I have a consistency video tutorial on YouTube. And this tutorial is, it's nice to watch because it shows you that when you're working with consistency, you have to figure out on your own what consistency you like. Okay, I'm going to show you these three. We're going to do some cookies. You're going to see the difference. But you have to find your own. You have to do some of the work. I can, help you do some of the work, but you have to figure out what works best for you. So in that tutorial, I basically tell you to make consistencies from the thinnest to the thickest, and to mark them and put a Sharpie to your bag so that you know which one is which, and then flood cookies with them and see which one you like the best. It doesn't take too long, but it'll help you figure out what that perfect consistency for you is, okay? So that's my little, the more you know, my little star. Okay, so let's take a look at all of these. And I don't have a spatula. I could probably use that. The one thing I forgot was a spatula. Where is my paper towel? Y'all ever lose stuff when you're like, I just had that? Total drying time, Mary, I haven't talked about that yet, but total drying time is 24 hours. I will say, my magic number is 24 hours. That's my magic drying time for glaze. So it does take a lot longer than royal. So that's okay. So benefits, since that kind of brought up that. Benefits to using glaze. There are several things that glaze can do that royal can't do. One of them is texture mats, and I'll show you that here in a minute. One of them is painting. I'll also show you that. So those two things. It also dries and floods beautifully. It floods very nice and smooth. So for beginners, and I don't consider myself a beginner, but even for me, I still love flooding cookies because it's just such satisfaction watching this beautiful base flood just be so nice and shiny. The other benefits to it are it definitely has a different taste than royal and a different mouth feel. Royal sometimes has that kind of crunch to it, which is great. There's nothing wrong with it, but that sometimes doesn't really happen with glaze. You don't have that kind of texture that you do with royal. Some of the drawbacks to it: it takes a long time. It takes a while to dry. I can't do detail work one thing right after another. For the most part, I don't use a dehydrator. I never have. I have one time or two times, but I don't use it on a normal basis, so I can't really speed up the drying time in between. Other glazers do, so if that's a route you want to take, then I would definitely find those people that do that. I find it doesn't help me at all, so I have just revolved my cookie schedule around how to benefit my time the most. Okay. So drawbacks also, other than time. And other than it doesn't do detail work right away, is that, totally forgot what I was going to say. Oh, craters. We do get craters a lot. So definitely craters are an issue. Hopefully when we talk about detail glaze, I can help you with that. But craters are you know, pretty much Glazer's arch nemesis. We have them all the time. So I don't think Royal Icing does it as much as Glaze does. All right, so let's take a look at these three. Remember I told you, okay, so this one is too thin, this one is just right, and this one is too thick. So let's take a look at the too thick. I'm gonna move these kind of up out of the way. So this thickness, if I were to compare it to something that I had either in my bathroom or I had in my kitchen, I would say like it's like marshmallow fluff, and maybe a little bit, you know, thinner than marshmallow fluff. So it's very thick. Obviously I can still flood with it. You can see once it kind of falls down into the bowl, it really doesn't ever settle out. Okay, so I mean it is getting there, but I would have to really shake this bowl to really get it to settle totally smooth. So keep in mind, you know, whatever happens in your bowl is what's going to happen on your cookie. So if you get this kind of thicker icing and you really like to use the thicker flood, then you're going to be shaking every single cookie that you have to make it go flat. Okay, that's not my favorite thing to do, but I feel like thick floods have a place and a time. So I feel like thick floods really work when I'm trying to create maybe very intricate shaped cookies and I need the outline to really stay put, and I need the outline to, maybe I'm airbrushing cookies and I need the outline to go all the way to the edge of the cookie. So I will use a thicker flood to create that, to achieve that, so that my flooding, once I outline with this thicker, the flooding I can do with a thinner one and it will hold on to it. Hopefully that makes sense. So you would basically have two consistencies. I don't do that all the time, but I do it from time to time if I feel like I need to get the cookie all the way to the edge for airbrushing purposes, or if it's a kind of intricate cookie. So this would be kind of an example. Like if you had this as your cookie shape, this is a very pretty plaque, but it has a lot of like curves and sharp corners and edges and points. So I would use a thicker flood with this one so that I saw all that detail. Okay, so there's a purpose, there's a way for you to use thick flood, but it's not something I would use, you know, all the time. It would be for sure not something that I would use to try to flood an actual cookie, because like I said, it's going to take you forever and your hand is going to hurt. Okay, so that's the too thick. I'm going to save it to make detail glaze with, because usually when you're making detail glaze you want it thick. So I'm going to save that pink for here in a little bit. Okay, this one is the just right one, so I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of kind of visual reference to it before I move on to the thin one, as I'm going to talk about this one later or here in a little bit, but I'm going to just kind of show you. I would say this one is a lot more like corn syrup-y mixed with icing out of a can. I used to say when I was teaching classes like in person, it's like Elmer's glue and toothpaste. You know, two things that you would never mix together. That's what it's like. Now, don't ever do that. I also joked because I thought, oh my gosh, what if when you mix Elmer's glue and toothpaste together, it like creates some horrible, you know, chemical reaction and it causes something. So don't do that. But if you could mix toothpaste and Elmer's glue, I feel like this would be the consistency. Okay, so with that said, this is the too thin one, and the too thin one I would compare really to corn syrup. It is very, very, very thin. You can watch it in the bowl here. It just immediately goes smooth. There is no, you know, waiting. There is no hardly any counting. If you were counting this to try to get what's called a bead on it, it would literally take maybe 4 seconds. That's really, really quick. And what's going to happen is, because that's really, really quick, that is going to do that on your cookie, and it's going to quickly run over your cookie. Okay? So this is way too thin. And if you outline with a thicker consistency and then you use this to flood, there still can be problems. One of the problems when you do a thinner flood is you have cracking. And I have one of the cookies here that I'm going to use, and I can see right now that it has cracks on it. It has cracks on the surface. It literally hasn't moved from this table. I haven't moved it. You know, nothing has disturbed it. But I know that that bag of icing that I used for this, for the cookie, was a thinner flood. So, and I'll try to kind of move it in different lights so you can see hopefully the cracking. But the cracking is happening right there. Okay. So, yeah, you guys can see it. So, cracking happens more when you have really thin floods. So while I love the thought of, oh, I'm going to outline with a thick flood, and then I'm going to come back and just flood all of them with this thinner flood, it doesn't always, you know, it doesn't always work out in your favor. So as long as you're okay with little, and when I mean cracks, you guys saw that cookie, it's still nice and flooded. It's still going to be great. I know I'm going to press a texture mat into it, so I don't really care. If you were going to airbrush over it, it's going to be covered up anyway. If you're putting a lot of detail work on top of it, it's going to be covered anyway. So if that doesn't bother you, then by all means use the thinner flood, save your hand. But just know that a lot of times when you use a thinner flood, you will get those hairline cracks and the surface will crack as well. I feel like it's because the surface dries quicker and the underside, you know, that second layer doesn't, and it just kind of keeps moving. So I could be wrong. I'm not a scientist. Okay, so that's too thin. Okay, I wouldn't use it. If I were going to use it, then I would thicken it up with some powdered sugar until I got to the consistency that I wanted. Okay, so let's go back to our just right consistency, because we're kind of like the Three Little Bears. And this is my just right. And again, this took me a couple, weeks to really find. When I first started, it took me a couple weeks to really find that flood that I really like. And again, that's up to you to determine which one you really like. Okay, not up to me. So this is like the just right one. Again, toothpaste Elmer's glue. It has a bead to it. I can count it. It does go flat on its own, but it doesn't take me shaking the bowl to make it go flat. So that would be another thing that I'm finding that I'm looking for. I need it to go flat in the bowl without any manipulation, but it needs to take a little bit of time to do that, not instantly. Okay, thanks. Isn't that pretty? Hi, Mimi. Okay, so I have bagged all three of these. So I have taken all three of our colors, the too thick, the just right, and the too thin, and I have put them in bags so that we can kind of take a look at what it looks like to use them on a cookie. Okay, so I'm just going to flood some hearts because it's almost Valentine's Day. Not really, we still got 14 days. If you're like me, I'm like, don't rush me. Don't rush the holidays. Especially I feel like with cookiers, we're like, don't rush the holidays. We need time. We need time to get all of our stuff done. All right, so I'm going to outline and flood one of the hearts with this pink color, which was the too thick color. And so that you can see how long it takes to really, I know, please don't rush it, right? I mean, I feel like we're rushed already enough with the stores. Okay, so I'm going to outline. Now, I know with this thicker flood, I can go to almost the edge of the cookie because it's just not going to allow it to go over, okay? You will notice when I get to this thinner cookie, I will not put it all the way to the edge because of the fact that I know that it will go over, okay? So I'm going to go through and flood this, and it'll probably make a liar out of me right now. So it will go smooth. It's not going to go smooth as quickly as the other ones will, but it will go smooth eventually. And as with most of this, you don't want to leave any spaces without any icing. Okay. So you guys can see it definitely goes smooth. It takes some convincing. You have areas right there where I added some extra icing to help it out. It didn't quite want to do that. So I'm just taking and just kind of tapping. If you don't want to use your scribe, you can always just take and kind of tap your cookie. It will eventually go smooth, but I noticed that I had to do something to it, whether that was pay attention to it, not, you know, shake it, tap it, whatever. I had to manipulate it a little bit. And some of the time those manipulations don't bother you and it's fine because, you know, it's not that big a deal. But there are times where I don't want to manipulate 150 cookies. I want to just do my cookies so that I can get to the fun part of actually doing the decorating part. Okay. So I'm going to do the 2 thin and same size of hole. Just going to kind of move that one up. I don't want to stick my hand in it. So I'm not going to go to the edge on this one because it is so thin. I'm going to allow the icing to kind of move a little bit. If I were to go to the edge, maybe I'll go to the edge up here. I'll go to the edge up on that top part. We'll see what happens up there. Okay, we'll see. So then I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to flood this. And again, look how easy that is. Oh my gosh, so easy. It's just dripping basically out of the bag. I really am not pushing all that hard. I can manipulate it for a while. I don't even have to use my scribe. It went pretty well, right? But if I had went to the edge, and maybe we'll see it there, it might go over. If you're using sprinkles, it might go over. So, and then there's that fear of the cracking. With that thinner flood, you're gonna get more of a chance of it cracking. So I'm showing you these because I feel like there's a time and a place for all of them. But they all have their pluses and minuses, and you have to figure out where your like perfect place is. Not to say that, you know, I still use thin floods sometimes. I still use thicker floods sometimes. It just depends on what those cookies are. Okay. It does dry, Terry. So yes, if you don't want to see your outline, then using a thicker consistency means you have to do the cookies, like you have to outline and flood right away. Or not right away, but you know, within the next 30 seconds to a minute. If you don't do that, then yes, you will see the outline around the edge of your cookie. So good question. Okay, so that was too thin. That was too thick for me. And this one's going to be my just right one. Okay, so still the same. It's still nicely coming out of the bag. Still going to be nice and smooth. I could go closer to the edge with this one, but I'm not going to. And this one's going to take just a little bit more time to settle, but I shouldn't have to manipulate it in any way. It should just go nice and flat. This is the nice thing about Glaze. This is definitely one of those icings that are great in those DIY kits. They're easy for kids to use. They make most people feel very accomplished and very successful when it comes to cookie decorating, which, you know, when you buy those kits, you want to feel like you're a cookie artist. Yeah, Terry, with that purple, you should be able to do a large cookie fairly quickly. Let me grab one real quick, Terry. I think I should be able to do this one. Okay, so Terry's got a good, she's got a good point, but I want to make sure that you see, if you have a larger cookie, and you have that thinner, this is that thinner flood. So if I go through, I'm afraid I don't have enough in my bag, but we'll see. Woo! My arm slipped off the table. Okay, so if you have these bigger cookies that you want to flood, then that are like this, my suggestion would be to outline them and then maybe have two different bags. Maybe have a little bag. It can be all the same consistency. Have a little bag that you can do the outline, and then maybe have another bag of the same consistency that you can cut just a little bit bigger, because you want to be able to get icing in there. So I did cut this a little bit bigger. And even though it's a thinner flood, I should be able to go through and see how it just immediately goes smooth. Like there's no, which makes me really nervous. I'm glad I didn't go all the way to the edge because it's really thin. But you can kind of manipulate it still, make it do what you need it to do. As long as you didn't go to the edge, you should be fine. But when I cut that a little bit bigger, it's going to be able to have that nice smooth. Even if I did it with the regularly cut bag that I had, it still should be okay. So Terry, maybe try to thin yours out just a little bit. So, because you definitely don't want it to be, getting it smooth. You don't want to have difficulty with that. You want to be able to do that fairly quickly. That's the lovely thing about glaze. So maybe try to thin it down just a little bit. So, yeah, don't, and Terry, you wouldn't have known that had, somebody not said that. Definitely, if you have a bigger cookie, you're going to save your hand a lot by making a small bag of something and then a bigger bag of something. I don't think I have any examples of that. Maybe I do. Well, I kind of do. So obviously we're doing cheese cookies, like we're all in this area just, bleeding red and gold right now. So I had to do some arrowheads. So I will have like a small bag for the outline, which this really wasn't it. This was the big bag. And then I'll have another bag of the same color that I will use, and I will cut the hole a little bit bigger, and I will then flood my cookie with that. So you don't have to create a whole bunch of different consistencies. You can use the same one, just have two different size bags, holes cut in your bags so that you can kind of help yourself. Okay. I'm really kind of shocked that that's actually not flooding over. Hi, Diana. Sorry, I didn't email you back. So smart. I don't know if it's so, but thank you. I just hope that I can help everybody, because I know sometimes it's frustrating. And really, if you can get consistency down, then man, you've tackled 80% of, cookie decorating, honestly. So that's the biggest, caveat with all of this is if you can just practice and get that right, then it'll make all the difference. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to move these off. So this was too thick, too thin, and just right. And you can see at the end of the day, they all work just fine, right? It's just what you find comfortable. Okay. I do not find that purple comfortable. Making that big heart made me nervous. This makes me comfortable. This makes me have to work a little harder. So just kind of know that with glaze, find that place that you really like. Okay. Hi, Pam. Okay. The other thing that it does, so let's move these off. Bye, Pretty Heights. Okay, the other thing that it does is you can use texture mats on it. Okay, so texture mats are just silicone mats that you can get pretty much everywhere. All right. Thank you, Cindy. You can get texture mats really anywhere. I've gotten them off of Amazon. I've gotten them from England. I've gotten them from the Wish app. I've gotten them from AliExpress. I literally buy texture mats a lot. You can find them in the fondant section of your craft stores. You can use fondant presses if you have that. They're the same kind of thing. There's just so many options out there when it comes to these texture mats. I'm going to try to get a few other ones out. So like this was I think this was in the clay section of my craft store, but you could definitely use these. These are a little bit flexible. So, you know, definitely can just, you know, press them into the fond or into the glaze. These are the ones that I've gotten from, you know, Amazon and AliExpress, Wish. I mean, there's just all sorts of different textures, all sorts of different, you know, places that you can buy them from. And the great thing about Glaze is you can take them and you can press them into your cookie after the icing is dried for 4 hours. Now, I'm going to be real honest, this cookie is not dried for 4 hours. It's only dried for about 3. Yeah, it's only dried for about 3. So it may not work 100%, but you guys will get the... I know, isn't it pretty? The one thing I will say about these mats, I have used these several times, but I mean, I'm sure you guys can see that. It's very textured. Like, it's very intricate and very textured. So glazed icing will not do this one well. But if you watched the video last week, when we talked about edible clay, this would work really well with edible clay because you could just like roll it into it. This one works a little bit better. So I definitely noticed this side of this mat doesn't work all that well, but it's really pretty. All right, so this mat is from Elam Sugarcraft. They're located in England. I think England, across the pond. They're located across the pond. So on this mat is clean. I don't have anything in it. I was trying to think if I had like cornstarch. I don't think it. Sometimes I'll put cornstarch in them, but sometimes I won't. Oh, thanks, Tara. Tara, these are press-on nails. I love press-on nails. They're my favorite. Okay, so I don't normally put powdered sugar or cornstarch on them. They should just press into your glaze and then you can pull it off. Some people struggle with this. So again, remember how I told you need to practice? You might have to figure out where that magic number is for your mats to work with your glaze. Mine is 4 hours. We're gonna hope it's 3.5. But you just need to kind of understand that your place you live, your house, whatever, might have different humidity. It might have different dryness. So you might get to 4 hours and it might be too dry. So you'll have to back it up. If you live in a more humid place, it might take yours a little bit longer. So 4 hours might not be long enough. Okay. So just kind of know 4 hours is my magic number. I was really hoping that it would be 4 hours, but I completely forgot while I was, you know, again, knee deep in red and gold cookies. So what I'm going to do is just push this. I'm just going to basically place this on my cookie. And I'm just going to kind of walk my fingers around. And you can kind of take a peek to see how it's going. Okay. You'll be able to tell if you're pushing too hard or not hard enough. You'll be able to tell. And I just kind of keep it on there as I walk it around, and I just kind of push it in there. Okay? Yeah, so Maxine's number is 3.5. So let's hope that mine is 2. So, ta-da! So this has got to be my fabulous, most favorite thing about Glaze is when you get to use texture mats, because it just takes your cookies kind of to that next level, and it creates texture that you don't have to use fondant, you don't have to use anything. It's literally just pressing it into the icing that's already there, and you are pretty much done. So this went from a nice pretty orange heart to now it has this really pretty intricate kind of cable knit kind of look to it, and it didn't stick, totally stayed on my, you know, on the cookie. So that's what I'm saying, you're gonna have to kind of play with it so that you can find your magic, you know, time. Mine now is 3.5, so I can probably press at 3.5 to 4 now, and it came out really well. If it's sticking to your mat, then it is a little too wet, and also it shouldn't peel away from your cookie. I'm not real sure what that means, if it's peeling, if the icing is literally peeling away from your cookie. I've never had that happen, other than it was too wet, you know, other than it was too wet and it just pulled all the icing off. So most of the time if it's too dry, guess what? It's not going to do anything. It's not going to press in there. You could press all day long and it won't work. It'll only press in certain spots. So if it's dry, that's what will happen. But if it's nice and ready, it will do like that. And you have now created this really pretty texture. Again, you could do different textures. No, Cindy, I don't think it would. I mean, I don't think it would, because I feel like Glaze and Royal look kind of the same. I will say, just from, you know, working with Royal a little bit more now, they're just texture mats, Tara. Silicone texture mats, food safe silicone texture mats. Cindy, I would say, like, I feel like Royal is puffier. So while Glaze has some puff to it, and you can definitely have a thicker flood and it will make it even puffier, it's not always puffy. So you're going to probably notice the difference in the sense of maybe some of your cookies might look flat, but if you're doing texture mats, then it's going to you're not really going to see the flatness of it. Yeah. Has a crisper look. I would agree. I think there's ways to make it look crisper, but I would agree with Maxine. I think Royal Icing, like I said, we have those moments where it's kind of necessary. We want those like really fine details. It's really hard to achieve that with Glaze. So, oh, it would be. I mean, and you could do it, and it just would be a nice, like any holiday. Like I'm even thinking like Easter, you know, to have a little lamb, you know, having things like that. It's always fun to kind of have that, and you can. Excuse me, Cindy, you can also use the texture mats on the edible clay that we talked about last week. So you could, or fondant, you could roll out some edible clay, press in that texture mat, and then you could just add that to your cookie. It's going to taste good and everything. So if you didn't want to, you know, make 2 different icings, you could definitely use edible clay. But this is a great way to kind of add that texture to it. But I love them. I love texture mats. That's what I love about Glaze. It's probably my #1 thing. So, kind of biased about that. All right, so let's talk now. That's all about Glaze. Oh, I did say painting. So let's do a little bit of painting just real quick. So Glaze is wonderful for hand painting. Okay, absolutely wonderful. It works with both water and Everclear. You can use either or on your projects with Glaze. It doesn't divot, which makes it a nice, pretty, you know, a nice canvas to work on. And by that I mean, if I were to work and overwork and work and overwork, then eventually if you were doing this on Royal, you know, with painting, you would get kind of dents and divots where the icing has soaked up so much of the water. Glazed icing doesn't do that, but it does have to be dry, okay? You should try it, Terry. It's so fun. So when you're painting, it does need to be dry, and you can't skip that step, okay? If you skip that step, then you're going to run into problems because it is powdered sugar and corn syrup, which are totally water soluble. The more water you add to a kind of dry cookie, it's going to turn out not so good. Your icing's going to dent and move, and trust me on that. Just make sure that anything you hand paint is going to be dry, unless you're just doing something that's kind of watercolor-ish and you're not really doing, you know, a whole lot of painting. I guess you could then do it on a kind of semi-wet cookie. I just have always found that painting is one of those things that I make sure it's really dry. So I do have some Everclear. I do have some of that turquoise. How do paint your own cookies come out? Paint your own cookies turn out just fine. You can scrape a stencil on, you can airbrush a stencil on, you can do whatever you would like to do. So paint your own cookies come out really good. I've done them for several years. So yeah, they paint just fine. The kiddos can paint and paint and paint. I think the one thing that I think we're all kind of not frustrated with, but I think it's in the cookier community, we're all kind of like, okay, we'd like a black that doesn't bleed. It's going to bleed. So regardless of what you use, you know, I usually use white just because usually kids can see it, or like an ivory. and they can still see the design, but when they go to paint it, it doesn't bleed black and everything. So I do my paint rounds a little differently than that. So I wanted to paint this. I'm going to turn this into a rainbow here in a minute, but I wanted to paint the background of it, just kind of some of that blue. So I have just some Everclear. My paintbrush has got pink in it. So I just have some Everclear, and I'm just going to put some, I'm just like taking, you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm just taking a little bit of it. I don't want it to be like totally saturated. I'm just looking for some nice, pretty, you know, color on this. Maybe some darker areas. Okay. Painting is just kind of one of those things, especially when you're doing like watercolors like this. I just want to make it look pretty. That's all I'm doing. So then I'm just going to come back with a clean brush and just kind of soften up some of those edges. You don't want them to be too rough. Maybe add some darker over here, and maybe some dark over in here. And again, because I'm using Everclear, it dries really fast, and it kind of gives this like watercolor effect by all I'm doing is just tapping, you know, on and letting the alcohol kind of spread and kind of like disperse. Okay. And that's all, you know, when you're wanting to paint, if you're wanting to just give like a nice subtle background, doing things like this on that glaze, and then you can even add details with Royal if you wanted to, will for sure, you know, you have this nice yummy base icing, and then you can definitely add the details on with Royal. There's lots of cookiers out there that use that whole, you know, that technique. Okay. So definitely can paint, and like I said, you can paint with water or with Everclear. I'm just using Everclear to kind of give it that like sky, just that little sky look. So pretty, pretty. And you could like flip some gold on there if you wanted to. So painting on glaze is awesome. I would say it's really good if you're trying to paint something that is very like photorealistic too. I know right now the sugar prism paints, the powder paints, I know Michelle has a lot of classes, and I know she does it on Royal for the most part, but you can definitely use those paints on glaze and they work really well. It's things that I've painted on before. I don't have any laying right here, but I've painted with them on the glaze and it works really well. So I'm gonna let this one kind of set off to the side while we talk about detail glaze so that it can dry. Okay. So detail glaze, what is it? Why would you use it? Well, detail glaze is the addition to fat into our icing. Okay. So the fat can be anything. My fat right here is butter. I tend to lean towards butter or butter flavored Crisco or butter flavored shortening because I feel like it is, I lean sometimes toward the shortening because it's shelf stable, so I don't have to worry about using it in a certain amount of time. Whereas if I'm using butter like I am today, I try to keep track of using this within, a few days. I do keep it in the fridge in between. Just kind of all those rules about butter. If you're weird about those kind of things, maybe go towards the Crisco, the butter flavored shortening. You're not adding enough of it to your icing to give it any sort of different flavor. But if you're also concerned with that, you don't want it to taste like shortening, then go ahead and hit it with just a little bit more extract, emulsion, something, whatever you've got in your icing. Okay. So remember the icing that we had, the too thick. So I want to add this, and I'm gonna scoot you guys up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to add this, looks like probably a teaspoon. It's not quite a tablespoon, but I'm just going to add that to that. Now, it's soft, okay? It's soft. You want it to be soft because you're going to have to mix it. And you don't want it to be, you know, cold, because you want it to really get fully incorporated into your icing, okay? And once you get it into your icing to make detail glaze, then you would add powdered sugar to thicken it up. Okay, so let's talk about why. Let's talk about the why we need detail glaze, when would we use it, that kind of stuff, while we're sitting here looking at it. Why? Detail glaze is meant to be used when you're creating really fine details, okay? So, I was just pulling some cookies, hang on. So, if I look at my Go Chief, sorry, I had to say Go Chief somewhere, okay? When I use detail glaze, it's when I'm looking to do either writing, when I'm looking to add fine details that I don't want to run together, when I want to make flowers, when I want to make numbers, if I want to make hair, anything that you have that is going to need to have some details to it, detail work, that you don't want to run together, you probably are going to have to use detail glaze or the thicker flood glaze. I just go ahead and make detail glaze because it just works for me so much better. Okay, so especially with writing, yeah, and I'm going to show you that here in just a second when it comes to writing, okay? I made that up, Betty. That football cutter is this is such an old cookie, so no judgment on this cookie is literally a month and a half old. Yeah, so it's just a football with a plaque Franken cookied on it. I thought it was cute. So detail glaze, that's why I would make it. The other thing, and we kind of talked about this with the thicker flood. The other time I use detail glaze is if I have plaques that I want, or even word cookies, like I have the love cookie here. Anytime I want to have cookies, or have cookies that are very intricate, very detailed, very loopy, sharp points, curly corners, all of that, I will use detail glaze to outline the cookie, and then I will use regular glaze to flood it. You're still going to see the outline because the glaze doesn't really go together with the detail glaze, in the sense of it doesn't just meld together like they used to, or, you know, like if you had glaze and glaze. But if you're going for sharp points and you're going for corners and loop-de-loops and curves and, you know, all of that, then detail glaze helps with doing plaques like that, okay? So that would be the other reason I would use detail glaze. It does help with craters also. So we talked about craters a minute ago. Detail glaze, because it has that fat added to it, it will help with those craters. So we add the fat to the glaze so that we can add the powdered sugar to the glaze, because you can add powdered sugar to regular glaze all day long, but it's just going to thicken up to a ball of very not workable icing. I mean, you guys can imagine if you just added powdered sugar to glazed icing, it's just going to get kind of, you know, it's just going to get really clumpy. It's just not even, you're not even going to be able to squeeze it out of a bag. So we add the fat to it so that we can add the powdered sugar to it so that it will still be pipeable, so that it will still be able to be piped into, you know, onto the cookies. And we do that so that it will hold the powdered sugar, so that it will hold its shape. And you guys can see that right now in the container. You can see right here that you still see the lines from my spatula where I stirred it. With regular glaze that we just worked with, it wasn't doing that. Those lines go flat, but this does not, okay? So you can definitely add powdered sugar to this and keep adding powdered sugar to it and keep adding powdered sugar to it. It will eventually get too stiff that you can't really do anything with it, but you can get it pretty stiff. You can get it stiff enough to make flowers. You can get it stiff enough to, you know, pipe flowers like you would like buttercream, because basically it's kind of what you're creating. And I would suggest if you're going to pipe flowers, go ahead and just make buttercream and add a little bit of corn syrup to it. Because once you kind of get this to a really, really thick, like piping flowers kind of thickness, it does get really hard on your hands. So I will say, like, it's not my favorite to pipe flowers with. I would rather either pipe flowers with just buttercream, or I'd rather just pipe flowers with royal icing. I don't add a lot of flowers to my stuff. And if I do, I'll use my molds with my edible clay because they taste better. But I'm just going for kind of a nice, stiffer consistency. I have a plan for this. So you can see, like, the point still kind of folds over. So if you were really wanting a fairly stiff consistency, you would obviously keep adding powdered sugar. If you get it too thick, you can always put some water in it and thin it down. That's actually how I came up with, I guess with edible clay is what I was going to talk about. So this eventually would turn into edible clay, I think, if you added a little bit more butter to it, if you had more. So, but there's a recipe for edible clay. So see how it's starting to kind of pull away from the edge of the bowl? That's kind of what you want. It's going to hold its shape. You could probably make some flowers with this that aren't as detailed, like toothpick roses doesn't work really well with this kind of thickness. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to give it a little bit more because what I want to do, I need it to be a little bit thicker so that it will definitely hold its shape and not run at all. Okay. It's going to get loud. So is everybody finding this informative and helpful? Hopefully it answers some of those questions that, you know, I feel like Glaze sometimes has, that sometimes being, you know, having done this for a while, you don't really think about anymore. Okay. So I have kind of 3 different thicknesses of detail glaze right now. This one you saw was pretty thick, okay? Pretty thick. I have one that's a little bit thinner and a little bit thinner. Like these both are the same, but this one's gonna be thicker. So I just have them bagged and we're gonna use them on our rainbow here in a minute to show kind of what to use them for. I did bring this to kind of show you, but I think doing, well, maybe I'll do the elephants. I brought the little elephants because I feel like these outlines, these little, when you have little ones, then I feel like it's easier to use the detail glaze to outline them than the regular glaze. I feel like I kind of lose the shape of this, but I'm not sure if they'll work on the elephants. You know what we'll do? Let's do this. Okay, so I'm going to use my detail glaze. I'm going to use it to do the side of this pretty little plaque here, okay? So I'm going to use this to outline this side. Sorry, I got to concentrate. I have to concentrate. The nice thing about detail glaze also, I feel like I can go all the way to the edge without having to worry about it falling over. Okay. All right, so did that with detail glaze. Okay. And then this side I'm gonna do with my regular glaze, just that just right one that I talked about. Just so that you can kind of see, hopefully, I didn't really test this theory out, but hopefully you'll be able to see that the side with the pink is going to have a lot more, it's going to show a lot more of the design on it. Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad everybody's finding it helpful. You know, obviously I want to make sure that these are worth everyone's time. No one wants to set live for 1.5 to 2 hours and have it not be helpful. I'm going to kind of move my camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and flood this in, and hopefully you'll be able to see kind of what I'm talking about and kind of how I have the outline help me with using detail. And I'm going to kind of squeeze my bag a little bit. Pull this around because I want to make sure it gets right up against that outline, just like I did on the turquoise side. Okay. And now it's just all about getting all the icing in there. I love this plaque. It's probably one of my favorite plaques, and you know, to be totally honest, I have no idea where it's from. It's just a very pretty, like, ornate plaque. Okay. So, now that I have that outlined, I'm just going to kind of take and pull this out just to kind of help that a little bit, but I'm only going to do that on these ends here. Okay. It takes 24 hours to dry. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit, or a lot. Ooh, let's get down here. So that hopefully you guys can see that on the pink side, you have much crisper lines all the way around. Okay, and then on the turquoise side, you don't really have those crisp lines. Okay, does everybody kind of see that? Does that make sense? So you've definitely got an advantage if you're using, you know, the detail glaze with your cookies. You definitely have an advantage if you have plaques. It's going to make them pop, and it's going to make them look a little bit crisper. Whereas the turquoise side still looks great, but it's a little bit softer. It's almost like the turquoise is a shadow. So definitely, depending on what you're going for, I feel like the pink side has a definite more crispness to it, whereas this side has more of the shadow. So totally up to you with, you know, using that. But I do use detail glaze in these kind of situations. I also use it like in this situation, partly because I want to make sure to see every part of this cookie. It's a word cookie, okay? So I want to make sure that I see all of that. I don't want to have that get lost in anything. So I definitely use detail glaze when it comes to especially this cutter or any other word cutter, so that I don't lose the shape of them. Thank you. So I'm glad you guys can see the difference. That's what I was, you know, wanting to show you. So that would be one reason to use detail glaze, okay? So let's talk about the other reason. And the other reason is writing, okay? So I just have these two hearts here, you know, nothing too terrible, fancy about them. It's just a white and a, just a white and a blue heart. So I'm going to do another test with detail glaze and regular glaze. So I want to show you really why I use it, which is for writing. I want to write the word love along the side of the cookie, And I'm going to use the detail glaze with this little blue one, and I'm going to use the regular glaze with the bigger one, and just so that you can kind of see the difference. Okay, so with detail glaze, it will hold its shape. My letters will not run together. I can try to do, brush script. If you know how to do that, you can definitely do that with detail glaze. You just have to slow your strokes down a little bit, okay? And it will hold its shape. So you can definitely do detail glaze just with regular writing, or you can turn it into brush script. It's up to you, okay? It does change the color of the icing, Diana, so I tend to do that. I tend to take my leftover icing upstairs and make detail glaze with it. And then I just tend to, usually when you do that, you're going to cut the bag, right? And you're going to empty all the icing out into the container. So I usually have that bag, that's emptied out. It's usually just laying on the counter because I just emptied it all out into, in a container. So this bag is emptied out and laying on the counter. I can just add a little bit of pink back to it to get it back to that shade. But yes, it does change because you're adding butter, which lightens it. And then you're also adding more powdered sugar normally, which also lightens it. So you definitely have to, if you're really matching, like you really need it to match 100%, then just kind of add back in whatever color and you just need to start small, like always, okay? So that's with the detail glaze. Now this will be with regular glaze. And I will do the first two, the L and the O, just like I did over there. And then I'll try to do the V and the E with brush script, which will be a little bit heavier. Okay. So, you can see that using regular glaze to do lettering doesn't always work. Okay. Yeah, there is, Kelly. If you'll go to my website, crconfections.com, there is a recipe for detail glaze. I'm pretty sure there is. So you can see the difference. So this was written with regular glaze, and this is my just right regular glaze, like what I love. And this is written with detail glaze. You can see the difference. It's hard to even tell that I wrote love there. Okay. So that's the biggest reason I use detail glaze, is so that I can create those letters like what everybody loves, and I don't have to worry about being frustrated when I do that, because that's not what we wanted to come out. Okay, so just a little quick example there. So let's go back to our rainbow that I wanted to make. So I want to kind of show you the things that you can do with detail glaze. This was obviously regular glaze that was flooded with white and just let dry. So Angela, it doesn't flake off a lot of the time, but with letters like this, sometimes it will. So a lot of the times, to help with that, if you have that problem, I don't have that problem much anymore. But I know at the beginning when I was first, using detail glaze, it was kind of flaking off. This would be another example, that Chiefs one, like this right here. This is not coming off. It's not going to flake off. But I have learned that if I do my lettering, if I have like really pretty lettering or really fine lines like that, if I do it before the cookie is completely dry, like maybe at 12 hours or, even 6 hours, it's still going to stand up above the cookie, but it's going to have a little bit of that moisture still, that it will stick together better. So I definitely know it does happen, but just don't let your cookie fully dry, and go ahead and pipe on your words, details, whatever, and then it shouldn't flake off. Okay, so I hope that helps. And then we painted our rainbow with some Everclear and just some food gel, just to kind of show. But I wanted to go ahead and do a rainbow using kind of some different techniques with the glaze. So I'm going to use the white. The white is just regular detail glaze, and what I wanted to do is I just wanted to kind of show you that you can use this for that fun cable, like cable, you know, technique. So, and again, I think I talk about this all the time. Like, it takes a while to get the hang of this, so don't be hard on yourself. I know other cookiers make it look super easy, but it's really not all that easy. But it's kind of like you're making, and my thumb is probably in the way. It's kind of like you're making a lopsided heart. So you're gonna make a bubble and then pull down, and then make a bubble and pull down. And I just kind of alternate, but I don't go right beside. I'm kind of alternating and moving. We'll see if I can do it and curve it. But you would have to use detail glaze to achieve this look on this rainbow. Okay, or any sort of, you know, if you're doing this on a sweater or on a blanket or on a, you know, a stocking or anything like that, you have to use detail glaze. It will not work with regular glaze. These blobs would all just go together and you would look like you almost had a straight line across your rainbow. Okay. I do wish I was a little faster. I'm afraid to start this way because I'm afraid it's just gonna be a train wreck. There are cookiers out there that can do this much faster and much prettier than me, but I love this technique. It's probably one of my favorites. And once you kind of, that was ugly. Once you kind of get the hang of it, you can kind of quickly start to go. But again, can't do this with regular glaze. You'd have to do this with detail glaze. I like having the watercolor effect. You could definitely paint this. After it's dry, you could definitely paint it with gold and make it really pop. You could even paint it with that dark turquoise color and make it really dark against the sky. It would be really pretty. But, you know, that's a nice, pretty way. And again, you have to use detail glaze in order to, you know, kind of create that texture. Okay. So the next one I'm going to use this, just this purple. Again, this was just regular detail glaze, nothing, it's not really too terribly thick. And all I'm going to do is just create some lines. So I'm just going to create some pretty lines. This doesn't have very much in it, so my bag is going to be weird. Okay, so I just want to create some lines here. And again, showing that, you know, if I'm using detail glaze, then I can go ahead and I can put lines right next to each other. Whereas, you know, I wouldn't be able to do that with the regular glaze. They would just run together. You would literally have just a weird looking blob line. But since I'm using detail glaze, I can stack on top. I can, you know, I can kind of even put them to the side if I wanted to. Like maybe this next one, I want to kind of curve it a little bit. Okay, so again, wouldn't be able to do that with regular glaze, but I know that I can with the detail glaze. All right, and one last little stitch, one last little rainbow. This is going to be with our thicker detail glaze that we did. I took a class with Cookies, and Andy. We made a blanket, and I loved one of the stitches that we used on that blanket. So it just basically was like a curlicue, or like a, you know, a curly. So I'm going to do that here. Again, I would not be able to basically kind of create this like coiled look using glaze. That would, you know, that would not look like that. It would just look like one weird line. Okay. I'll get to that in a minute, Cindy. Okay. Good question though. So all those different textures all created, you know, with detail glaze, again, just adding a little bit of fat to it will definitely give you that option to still create those cookies that are out there. And you won't have to get frustrated because glaze won't do that. Okay. So Cindy asked, so, you know, this cookie sat out for 24 hours and it dried, and then I painted it, and now I have this detail work on it. Am I going to leave that out again overnight? No, I'm not. Once my cookies, I'm going to call it the base flood. Once the base flood is dry, I'm going to then put those cookies in some sort of covered container. I use scrapbook containers, like the big 12 by 12 containers, because they stack on my shelves really nicely. They hold a lot of cookies, but I put my cookies in those. They're pretty airtight. Again, I tend to work on my cookies pretty quickly once they get flooded, and once I want them to get done and heat sealed as quickly as possible. So I wait, you know, the 24 hours to let them dry and sit out for that base flood. But really after that, they're in covered containers until they get bagged. Because this little bit of detail here is going to dry naturally in their covered containers. And I would say I'd give it another probably 24 hours before I put it in a bag, but that's still, you know, being in a covered container. I want to make sure it's dry so that it doesn't stick to the bag, because that's the worst, is when you spend so much time on a cookie and then you put it in a bag and it, you know, isn't sealed and it's wet still. So use your best judgment when it comes to glaze. Do what you feel comfortable. I know there are some people that do not leave their cookies out for 24 hours. They always have them in covered containers. I haven't been able to do that without my cookies still being sticky and still sticking to the bag, and I don't really want that. So that's my plan. 24 hours base flood. After that, they're in covered containers until they're ready to go in bags. Okay. Kelly asked, can you freeze them? 100%, yes. You need to make sure that they are sealed really well. So if I'm ever going to freeze cookies, I will go ahead and heat seal them. So I will heat seal them in their own personal bags. I will put those cookies that are sealed inside of a Tupperware container, food safe, you know, like freezer safe container. I will stick that in the freezer. And then when you want to bring them out and set them somewhere for a while. Don't open the container, don't open the Tupperware, don't open anything. Just get it out of the freezer and maybe set it, you know, somewhere downstairs or wherever your freezer's at. Not everybody has downstairs, but like my freezer's downstairs. So I will take my cookies out of the freezer, leave them in their container, do not open that container. I set it on the shelf somewhere that it can come to room temperature for at least 24 hours. Usually it's longer. And then you can get them out, because at that point in time, all that moisture is reabsorbed everywhere where it was supposed to be, and they should be perfect. Okay. Anybody else have any more questions? I think that's all I wanted to do about glaze. We talked about glaze, why we would use it. We talked about detail glaze and why we would use it. You can see here, this would make a really cute flower. It would stick, you know, it would hold its shape really nicely. It would make leaves really nicely. So there's all sorts of things that you can do with detail glaze to help you kind of create those cookies that sometimes seem that they're a little too far-fetched for us as glazers to do, because sometimes they're a little too intricate. But you can still do them. You just have to know, you know, what techniques to use and things like that. So, are all of those colors the same consistency? Angela, I'm assuming you're talking about on this cookie. They are not. The white and the purple, or the white and the lavender, those are about the same consistency, which has some powdered sugar to it, but not a whole lot. It's still pretty thin. But the pink has quite a bit of powdered sugar added to it, so it's quite a bit stiffer. So you can see how it really held on to that curl, which is what I was going for. Bleed, the fabulous bleed. Oh, the fabulous bleed. Like, what's going to happen on this one? Maybe not. Bleed is probably going to happen on this one, the bleed from the turquoise, because I just made that turquoise. Like, I made it, you know, a couple hours ago. Anytime you're making darker colors, red, turquoise, greens, you know, blacks, always make your icing ahead of time. You know, make it, you could even do it that when you first make your icing, if you know you're going to need red, go ahead and make that red so it has that full 24 hours just to set. Okay, Betty Jo, thank you. I will stick it up there here in just a second as soon as I get off, because it's really just easy. And honestly, guys, for the detail, let me finish one conversation, sorry. Okay, so with bleed, always make your darker colors ahead of time. Give them time to set out and develop. The next thing to help would be to help with bleed would be to put your details that are those colors on top of or next to before that base has time to dry. Don't ever do it right next to it. So like this cookie here, do you guys see the bleed right there? So if I were doing this, obviously if you're going to do white, add white to every color. That helps. That's probably the number one thing. Add white vanilla or white food coloring to all of your colors, even black. But then you can go ahead and do these two right next to each other before they have time to fully dry. So maybe do this one first, wait for 5 hours, do this color so that they dry together and one isn't competing to get the moisture from the other. If you did this one first and it dried and then you did this one, it's going to want to pull the moisture from that brown, which means the brown is going to come into that. So do it while it's still a little wet and you can still create that dimension. Okay, can you do wet on wet? Yes, you can totally do wet on wet with glaze. It's probably one of the, you know, like most well-known things that you can do with glaze. So you can definitely take your glaze and drag it. You can do all sorts of wet on wet if you wanted to do flowers, if you wanted to do, you know, any sort of dragging, anything like that. I'm just going to do it real quick just so that you can kind of see. But yes, you can do, I think I just posted a video last week that I did a drag on a heart. So you can definitely do wet on with glaze. It works really well. Okay, and because the glaze stays easy to work with, it's a little bit easier to do that, especially if you're doing like the flowers where you're adding all those flowers onto a cookie that you already have icing on. Do be careful of overflow, but glaze is workable for a long time. I can go back into some of these cookies if I needed to, and I could mess with them if I needed to, because if you have like a bubble, okay, if we did this cookie an hour and a half ago, if I did that with Royal, that cookie would be hard to fix that, right? So all I have to do is, if you had something maybe that popped up, an air bubble, or maybe you had a piece of powdered sugar that was clumpy in there and you needed to get it out, you just do what you need to do, put some more icing in that, and then you can kind of coax it, convince it to go back down flat. Okay, so glazed icing works and it stays pretty workable, pretty long. It's not going to look perfect on this one, but it does have the ability to move and go back. Yeah, that would bleed all over, right? No, and Terry, I will say that there's a lot of different people out there that think a lot of different things about bleed. So if that wasn't working for you, if the letting it dry wasn't working for you, then do the opposite and let it stay wet, okay? Because I know when I first started, that was, everybody said, oh, let them both dry and they'll be fine, and that didn't work for me. So, okay, so somebody had another question. What was it? Hang on. Betty Jo, so you talked about there's no detailed glaze recipe. So and I'll put one up there, so totally fine. I'm glad you brought it to my attention. But detail glaze is just adding a little bit of fat to your icing. So it's not rocket, like it's not a totally, oh my God, you have to add this much. It can be a teaspoon per quarter cup. It can be a tablespoon per half cup. I mean, it just is, you're adding, so sometimes I just take a pat of butter and, you know, or a thing of Crisco and just kind of drop it into my container. You just need some fat to go into that icing to help you hold that powdered sugar, okay? Wizard. I don't know if I'm a wizard. I just have had lots of accidents. How many of us have been working and we've, you know, had our scribe out, and or we've had our hand and we've put our hand in the cookie, or our scribe has flown out of our hand and hit another cookie, or we've dropped a cookie as we're moving it to another, you know, as we're putting them on our cookie sheets here and there, we drop them on top of each other. Glaze at least allows you to kind of fix that, okay? So I hope you guys enjoyed today. I hope it's a lot of good information. I am going to probably download this and put it on YouTube, because I feel like it's a good little kind of, here's what glaze and detail glaze are. And so yeah. So I hope you guys have a good rest of the night. And I'll go jump on and put that detail glaze recipe. But again, just adding a little bit of fat. Doesn't matter what fat, just some fat. So hope you guys enjoy it. Have fun making cookies. And I'll see you guys next week.